Hey there, I'm Thomas Nyback. This is day 217 of 365 Days Towards Racial Change. Welcome. We're here talking about black issues. We're navigating the racial landscape in America from my limited black perspective. My, I believe I've been discriminated against here and there, you know. Uh, all things being equal, I made poor decisions in life that contributed to where I am now. But I'm not, I'm sure there's been moments in my life where this color of my skin has been a contributing factor to me being impotent, non competitive, um, at a loss, at a disadvantage, marginalized in America. I get it every day. And listen, we don't leave it up to the fox in the hen house to say who's after the chickens. The chickens and the hens declare their victimization. Black people feeling marginalized, feeling racism, being uh, uh, you know, rendered ineffective based on the color of their skin is up to black people. Black people get to say that, not white people hiding behind laws and legislations and a lack of honesty. So, yeah, I've been discriminated against because I said I've been discriminated against. End of discussion. Now, having said that, does the black mind intellectually understand that argument and how that is, um, how that works, the dynamics of it, proving it for themselves, understanding it. We don't have to wallow in it. We can be perfectly honest about how America, land of the free, home of the brave, treats its black people. Do we know how it's written into the Constitution for black people to be marginalized? Oh, forget about emancipations and amendments later on. Those those documents rest on the foundation. The foundation determines the nature and structure of the upper levels. The foundation does. That those upper levels don't tell you what what is supporting that institution, that structure. It's the foundation, and it's immovable. To change that foundation is to change America forever. But we think we've got so much law and legislation protecting us. Well, you can't. We don't have an X-ray machine or some type of mental mirror that we can hold up and know exactly the thoughts and intentions of one another's hearts. This would be a whole different world if we could. It'd be better than any FBI profiling. We'd be able to catch our murderers and our gunmen. There's been more shootings and stuff. We'd be able to catch those persons long before they committed a crime, and we might even be able to uh, expose that truth, in their childhood and find remedy. You know, that science is a long way off. You know, but that would be nice. The black mind, black cognition, black understanding. The white mind, very important, inescapable. What's it like to live in a world where there's privilege, expectation of favor, power, um, majority, numerical numbers? Wow. You know, so these things have to well, should be a concern for the white mind, but I'm guessing it's more of a blind spot. You know, it'd be like me trying to explain to you how I walk across the room. That would have been a great conversation at 2 years old, at 1.5. Me telling you, okay, you know, I'm trying to keep balance. I'm trying to keep my head on top of this structure as I navigate the room. Uh, I can't tell you how I walk across the room. It's just natural. It's a privilege to walk across the room, and I can't explain it to you. Do we explain sight to the blind, sound to the deaf, walking uh, to the paraplegic? No, it's our privilege. Same for white folks. You know, love them to death. Yeah, thank you for everything. But there's still a blind spot. You know it's a blind spot. Uh, like with our sight, where the optic nerve goes into the brain, it's a blind spot. It's pretty eerie the first time I saw it. You got to do some stuff with papers and stuff, and you can see it. It's easy to see. Just Google your blind spot. You'll have instructions on how to find your blind spot. But it's a very real blind spot. The brain actually is filling in this site to make it look like one picture, one solid picture. But it's really bits and pieces being put together by this supercomputer up here. The white mind. Financial literacy. I want to keep pounding this into you until you hear it. You need more than a bank account, more than a place for your employer to send your direct deposit. Oh, and listen, you want those things. Don't go to check cashing places. Don't be down in the dirt. Find a way to get another bank account if you really screwed up, like me. Get a bank account, hold it. But you need that because the world functions in a certain way, and you need a certain presence. Don't go to check cashing places. Don't pay money to get your money. But right now, check cashing places aren't going away soon. But you don't want to pay money to get your money. Make sure you have direct deposit. You don't want to. It's the electronic age, internet, smartphones, and all that. You want your employer to send your damn money to the check cashing places. I've had a couple jobs where they didn't have direct deposit, and what a pain in the ass. I got to truck my ass to my bank with my check and all. That's dead. If your employer is not doing that, you're in the wrong job. You know that your paper check should say non-negotiable or not a check on it and the watermark. Uh, but it's just an affirmation that the money has been electronically sent to your bank account. Ah, I love that. I'm never working a job where they'll give me paper checks. You know, if they give me, you're giving me cash under the table, but I'm not taking your check to a bank. Banks don't honor their checks from strangers anymore. You know, you get well, you got to pay $1. Dude, it's your check. Your person gave me this check. Financial literacy, that's the dregs, that's the bottom, like a bottom feeder of how you work your finances. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't let the system rip you off. We're already struggling as black folks already. Now you got check cashing places and stuff. Have some self control. Say no to yourself once in a while. And let things be. Get a good hobby or start reading. You got an electronic device that should keep you occupied. You don't have to spend money all the time. Say no to yourself. Have some self-control. I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson on these issues of blackness and how we figure in America's landscape. First book of his I read was Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask, Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com. When we finish our extended version of story time here, we're going to get back into some of the meatier, weightier subjects and talk again plainly about the damage and the destruction against, you know, engaged against Black people in America to this day. Behind me, you'll see a hashtag #us2 symbol. Find Black women supporting one another there. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGENUF, or Black Facebook experience. This is the World Wide Web. If you cannot find your flavor, do what I did, start your own. I got a private email list. Some people I know personally, face to face, they just are content without it. Doesn't matter. This is a personal project. This is my catharsis. This is my healing here. I'm just glad I have some people slightly interested. Great. That's icing on the cake, cream on the coffee. Yeah. And like I said, we are in our extended version of story time, looking at Uncle Tom's Cabin. We just had the very sad, heart-wrenching departure of little Eva. She's spirit's gone to heaven. Now it's time to take care of her body. The family is still up at the summer vacation home up at Lake Pontchartrain, up north of Louisiana, north of New Orleans in Louisiana. And now we're about to talk about her burial and all that stuff. But first, we really want to take a little detour. Chapter 27, it's titled, "This is the Last of Earth," and that saying is ascribed to John Quincy Adams. And we want to talk about John Q. Adams and briefly here. He's a very important figure in the in history and the abolitionist argument. He was almost, if you're familiar with Roman orators and rhetoric and all that stuff, Socrates, Plato, John Q. Adams was a heavyweight when it came to oration and speaking. He knew how to convincingly bring an argument. And this is Harriet Beecher Stowe. I'm not sure what her motivations were for using a quote from him as a title of a chapter in her book. Maybe to talk about the transitioning of life to death, death to life, and what happens there. But I do want to just take some time, just give this John Quincy Adams this tribute. If you want to see get an idea of the man, look at a movie called Amistad, and Anthony Hopkins plays John Quincy Adams in that movie. And the Amistad it was a real slave ship. Amistad means friendship, kind of like Philadelphia. It's Spanish. Amistad is Spanish for friendship. And the Africans, they weren't slaves, and that's a very important part of the argument. The Africans took over the ship, but the ship still landed in New England. So they were kind of in limbo because they weren't slaves and stuff like that. They hadn't been put into the system. And there was actually, at this time, there were certain laws beginning to get enforced about how black people came from Africa to be slaves. They had to come through a certain process. Well, this ship came straight to New England, had been taken over by the black folks, and so now they were in limbo. And so they were arguing what to do: put them in slavery, imprison them, and stuff like that. But John Q. Adams argued, that they were free people. I guess I don't know the exact argument, but he argued before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did rule that they were free people and were not under. They were not slaves who had taken over, stuff like that. They were free people who had um, uh, got, they they were free people who were kidnapped that got their ship and revolted. A natural thing for free people to do. This is important because the Amistad, at least the argument for the Amistad incident before the Supreme Court happened in 1841. 16 years later, probably not the same Supreme Court. The justices hold their positions for life, but there might have been some. The Supreme Court may have been massaged a little bit, and this is important. 16 years later, we have the Dred Scott decision. Now, the Supreme Court there ruled that it says a black man would have no rights that a white man would respect. And the Dred Scott decision was about, Dred Scott, which wasn't actually his name, but they used that, went to a free state, came back, and he says, well, I went to a free state, I should be a free man. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's where the Supreme Court ruled against him about that. The point I'm making is the Supreme Court that heard John Quincy Adams' argument. Now, John Quincy Adams probably had power and prestige. He's the sixth president of the United States and stuff like that. It's probably slightly different Supreme Court that heard the Dred Scott decision. And, history from 1857 on, you probably don't have a whole lot of favor for black folks happening. Remember, we got the Missouri Compromise sandwiched in there as well. Not sure the dates on that, but the Missouri Compromise is important because it gave a lot of power to the slave states, slave voting. The response, backlash against that was the 3/5 human being argument. But we'll talk about we've talked about the Missouri Compromise before, but we'll talk about it again. But John Quincy Adams, born in Massachusetts, let's see, July 11th, 1767, and Braintree, Massachusetts, and he died February 21st, 1848, is where this quote, "This is the last of Earth." Historians are in disagreement about the second part of that quote, whether it's "I am content" or "I am composed." And so there's argument. They say, well, he might not be content because he had a genuine burden to see black people free in the land. Maybe composed is a better one, but you gotta go to ask him exactly what he said. But there's a difference in flavor there. He's been a senator, served under James Monroe, was the sixth president, like I said, from 1825 to 1829. And then after he served, he came back to Congress, which is interesting, right? I don't see that happening in my lifetime. I don't think I've seen a president leave office and then come back to Congress or anything like that. That's um, interesting. But he was just close to public service. So, barring his presidential, his 4 years, before that, he was a big voice of abolition. And after that, big voice of abolition with his capstone being the Amistad argument, where he's probably not so much the voice of abolition as president, because like for me, black issues, blackness, racism, that's a very big issue to me. I feel like it impacts my life and all that. But it's not as big as issue as one would think when one equated with a lot of other things. You know, as sixth president, the nation is still in its seminal years, early formation, how to have government even, international trade. It just recently had our war with England, and we're recovering from that. I've been reading a book called A Creature from Jekyll Island, and there were we had to resist encroachment from countries and forces from the north, encroachment from the south, and of course for today we can really understand. You had the French in general up north, Spanish in the south. The Native American issue was going on. Oh well, how to do politics. Here's a man who's had office and then comes back to Congress. You got a lot of busy things in government happening. Um, the John Quincy Adams was from the Whig Party. There were different parties. Republicans, Democrats used to be one party in this nation, if you can imagine that. Uh, you know, they're doomed to be separated at some point. We can see that now in hindsight, but it's interesting that it was once called the Republican Democratic Party. They were one party against the Federalists. That was another party. So you had a lot of this stuff going on. You know, the slave issues, right? The murder we've seen, the separation of families we've seen, and stuff like that. Those were real problems, concerns in the land. But they were, you understand that some of the justification for the lethargic attention to slavery is because, these powerful white men will step back, and they're trying to get a nation together, trying to expand westward, and there's issues there. You know, but they were busy gearing up and beating down the Native American, uh, murdering and slaughtering the Native American back to the Stone Age, almost to numbers that would make them unable to recover. So it's a big point. John Quincy Adams, he's a real hero. One of the leaders in the abolition movement argument, things like that were really transformative, seminal. We needed him. yeah, the majority of the Congress, legislation, and things like that, white men on the Supreme Court. These are all white men in these first years of American government. You know, had a very serious slave interest. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. I'm not sure if he had owned slaves, but remember he writes the brainstorming of how to handle black people in the Constitution. Him and Thomas Jefferson together. But John Quincy Adams is very revered, and he's very much respected. Frederick Douglass was actually a very eloquent writer, educated. He's the slave that escaped. I'm sure a bunch of Southerners would have liked to get their hands on Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, eyewitness to a murder. When he was a slave jumps into the creek or river and refuses to come out to help. And the overseer, the slave handler, shoots the slave point blank in the face with a shotgun. That murder is never recorded. No one's ever brought to trial for that murder. Frederick Douglass, eyewitness on that account. Probably not an isolated, thing in the South circumstance. Um, Frederick Douglass does write in the North Star about a month after um, John Quincy Adams' death. Says this feeling of respect and veneration is not felt entirely by white persons, but is shared to a considerable degree by the oppressed and despised colored people. Um, he says also his mighty exposures of the slave power and its aggressions on the rights of the North, the glorious victory achieved over the slave oligarchy in Congress with the infamous Mobocrat Thomas Marshall, representative from Kentucky, at his head. His unwearied exertions against the annexation of Texas. John Quincy Adams, just a humanitarian. Mobocrat is someone in charge of the mob. Just so, someone just like our current sitting president. The mob is at it, so I'm going to be the leader in charge of that. He mentions that guy. Exertions against Thomas Marshall, representative from Kentucky. Kentucky's a slave state. That's where Uncle Tom originates from. So John Quincy Adams, just a short break, a shout out that in all levels of American society, mid 1800s, especially, is kind of where we're focused at in Uncle Tom's Cabin, is someone is making some effort to bring some consciousness to the white, powerful, actually minority, because they're probably outnumbered by the blacks. We've talked a little bit about the influx and the response to that, black people. But at every level, there's somebody saying, wait a minute, slow down, we got to do better with this. And John Quincy Adams is kind of at the top of that list of advocates to get the world and the nation to see these black folks as more humanitarian way, break the chains, let my people go type thing. Beloved and held in high regard by the community, respected by all, no doubt. So just a little break there, reminder that there are plenty of people involved with this anti-slavery abolition argument. Very important. That's day 217 out of the way. I'm Tom Lindsay-Nyback. That's 365 days towards racial change. Come back tomorrow. We'll get into chapter 27 here and see how we finally put Eva to rest and how everybody is getting along, how the living are going to continue after this tragic passing, this change in all of life's dynamic. Come back tomorrow. Bye-bye.